Hey everybody, and welcome to another Darkest Dungeon mod overview. My name is ElementFive, and today we're taking a look at the Seraph. Marvin Seo's Seraph class is definitely a lot of fun. It is his fourth modded class and completed and enabled the Seo Special, the group we used a live stream event using only his four modded classes to move through the Crimson Court, killing every individual boss in a single run only. And in respect to his other three classes, she really does fit the final role of that ragtag group of weirdos. You have the Falconer, a powerful ranged damage and mark-oriented class, and then you have the Gorgon Lamia, which we covered in an earlier video, stress healer and healer that also goes snake form, and then of course following that was the Thrall, the barbarian slave frontliner that hits super hard and acts like a leper in many cases, really powerful riposte. And so finally we get the Seraph, which is basically the position 2 in that group, frontliner that is a little bit flexible in position 3 as well, but brings guard and a little bit of stress and mark synergy to the Seo Special. But you know, in general, you will hear a lot of modders talk about the desire to create more support classes in the DD modding community, because we're basically left with the Vestal and Occultist for the most part as healers in the base game roster. So you see a lot of support classes. It's rare that we actually see other guard-oriented modded classes, and so in that respect, the Seraph is really a breath of fresh air, just to have a very well-rounded, really well-polished and beautifully designed frontline guard-oriented class that really works around buffing her own prot, buffing torch, a little bit of stun, and a lot of mark synergy, which is very unique to her and works in a very interesting way. Now, as you would expect, the Seraph is a religious character, and she really synergizes with other religious characters very well. And the word Seraph translates roughly to the Burning One. And a Seraph is an angelic being associated with light, ardor, and purity. And for the most part, that is definitely what the Seraph is. That is how she's designed. She is sort of paladin, fanatic, mark-oriented hybrid. And according to her description, inhabited by a celestial being, the Seraph is the hand of light and smites foes with cleansing fire. She will unleash merciless judgment upon those marked as corrupt and protect allies with her impenetrable shield. Even as the Seraph's wounds grow more severe, her power does not waver. Instead, she is strengthened by pain, allowing her to unleash immeasurable divine might upon her foes. The Seraph's weakness lies in her broken body and fanatical faith. The Seraph is nothing without her blessed armor, and any foe that can bypass her sturdy defense will quickly end the Seraph's life. Such is the Seraph's nature that those around her find her to be an unsettling and menacing ally. Her unfeeling actions and zealous commands may cause many allies to question whether this Iron Maiden is truly what she says she is. And with the rest of Marvin's characters, we get another really beautiful backstory custom comic strip here that sort of explains a little bit of where she came from. And according to Marvin, the Seraph was captured by an enemy faction and deemed a witch, so was burned at the stake. And that's what we can see here, obviously, is the crowd that captured her sort of gathered around the stake, watching the glow of the flames. Then we see a more close-up shot of the Seraph attached to the stake as the flames begin to grow around her. The group continues to watch as the flames continue to grow and then finally consume her, until in a sudden flash of divine intervention, the Seraph's fire is put out and she is freed. The group jumps back in shock. They see the Seraph surrounded by holy light, the fire completely put out, her body smoking. We see this really nice frame here at the very end, the scarred and burned Seraph cracking just a little bit of a smile. freed from the smoking pyre, transformed as the Seraph with indefatigable purpose. Now, Marvin told me that she's actually inspired by, you know, sort of the idea of a paladin, a holy knight, and she does feel like that. But I think just based on this backstory and this comic strip and the way that a lot of her abilities look and work, her attitude, I get a lot of the fanatic in this, especially just the sort of PTSD that comes from, you know, her being burned at the stake here. It really feels like this is a character that, while definitely, you know, a holy knight and plays and feels like a holy knight, is also heavily influenced by the sort of fanaticism of the Fnatic character that came with the Crimson Court DLC, the imagery around that, the zealotry that comes with that, and maybe even to some degree the Flagellant as well. So before we jump into how she works and how each of her abilities break down, let's just take a brief look at her base stats here. At level 1 at Apprentice, her max HP is 26, which is pretty average. I mean, she has no dodge, no prot. She's actually kind of slow. She starts with a base speed of 2, and we have quick reflexes here, which helps that a little bit on this particular character. But 0 accuracy, 2% crit, and a 4 to 8 damage range, which really makes her look, for the most part, underwhelming. She doesn't feel like she has the potential for a lot of output, or she doesn't start with prot, so she doesn't really look that particularly strong as a guard class. No dodge either. But what's misleading about this actually is the fact that her guard ability will buff her prot considerably, and you can kind of stack that, and that really ramps up as you level this up and get to later game. And her attacks really synergize with Mark, and you'll see this as we go over her attacks here, plus 150% damage versus Marked. So that's where a lot of her output is going to come from, is the fact that she synergizes with Mark classes and is really kind of dependent on Mark synergy to do really big damage. In terms of her resistances, she has a 40% base resistance at Apprentice, low blight and disease, regular death blow. We do have Clotter here, which is buffing her bleed resist here, but nothing really that interesting. Okay, low trap resist, a decent move resist, I suppose. She's, for the most part, just feels sort of underwhelming until you get her into combat and start really using her synergistically with other characters. So let's just jump in and take a look at her first ability here, which is Vindicate. Vindicate is basically her bread and butter attack in most cases, and it is usable only in position 1 or 2, and it will target enemies in position 1 or 2. It is a melee attack with a base accuracy of 80, and it does 150% damage versus Marked, but then this catch down here, and you're going to find that this is really universal to a lot of her abilities, consumes the mark. So if you attack something without a mark, she's going to do, for the most part, fairly underwhelming damage. But if you attack something that is marked, she's actually going to hit it pretty hard, and she can crit really hard using her primary abilities against marked targets. But because it comes with the mark consumption, the fact that it takes the mark away from the enemy target is something fairly unique to her. This is not something we typically see in the DD sphere, and that really forces you to think about when you're going to use this. So we'll talk about that as we move forward, but just keep in mind that every time you use her abilities which capitalize on mark damage, you're also removing the mark from the enemy. So next in her kit then is Wrath. Wrath is a ranged attack that can be used in position 1, 2, or 3, and it will target any enemy in any position. It has an accuracy base of 90, minus 50% damage modifier, minus 4% crit modifier, and it comes with complete prot negation. It has armor piercing, it buffs the torch plus 4, and it does 200% damage versus marked, and again, consumes the mark. So again, the theme here is the underwhelming damage unless there's a mark on the target, but if it does hit that mark target, in this case, it has prot negation and 200 damage versus the mark, again, taking away the mark once you land the blow.
As the fiend falls, a faint hope blossoms.
So next in her kit is Vengeance. Vengeance is, in my opinion, probably her most interesting ability, and this is where she earned, at least in my Twitch community, the nickname Laser Waifu. Vengeance is a melee attack that you can use in any position, and it will target any enemy in any position, but the catch here is that you can only use it if you're below 33% hit points. So you can kind of think of this, there's a little bit of Flagellant influence here. If she gets below 33% HP, this opens up and it can do pretty good damage. It has an accuracy base 95, damage modifier plus 33%, and a crit modifier plus 9%. It raises the torch plus 10, it does 150% damage versus marked, again consumes the mark from the target, but also activates riposte, and then prevents her from being guarded and breaks any guards that are already on her. So Vengeance is a really interesting ability. It is one of those things that is, for the most part, not very practical and really situational, and definitely has a broader application when you go into later game where damage is going to be a bigger deal. You're relying on guard more often, and you can guarantee that she's going to be getting hit hard and becoming close to 50% or 30% HP more often. So next in her kit is Visage. Visage can be used in position 1 or 2. It targets both enemies in rank 1 or 2. It is a melee attack with accuracy base 100, damage modifier minus 100%. This is not supposed to do any damage, and it has a 100% chance to stun at level 1. This is the real catch though. Other companions in your party are going to take on a horror of 1/6. So, this is a really cool concept in my mind. What this is the Seraph removing her faceplate, removing that mask, and horrifying the frontline enemies so much that they become stunned. This feels, in a lot of respects, mechanically like the Hellions' Yop ability, but it's meant to be more punishing than Yop. It's meant to come with, rather than debuffs, it's meant to really be something that weighs on the rest of your group because, let's face it, Yop is a very, very powerful ability, and before Color of Madness, and probably still in Color of Madness, the stun meta is a thing. And so Marvin wanted to make sure that this was an ability that felt punishing to use. And that is typically what Marvin's fairly good at, as I said about his Thrall class, is really putting you in a spot where you're not feeling like this is a guaranteed powerful ability. In general, I feel like a 1/6 horror is really not that big a deal, and she has a way of sort of reducing the impact of this, which we'll see in her next ability. But a very, very interesting stun, and not something that I typically take most of the time, but definitely useful.
The abyss returns even the boldest gaze.
So finally we come to her guard ability, which is Intervention. Intervention can be used in any rank, and it can be used on any companion in the party, not herself, obviously. It is a guard ally, and it also clears horror. So this is really meant to synergize then with Visage to some degree. You could use her stun, and then the next round you could guard an ally and remove the 1/6 horror that you've put on one of your companions for using Visage, basically. It also comes with Self plus 15% prot at level 1, minus 10% stress damage received when guarding, and clears horror on Self, as well as marks Self. So some really interesting trade-offs here. This is a powerful guard ability, and this, the 15% prot buff that you get here will scale up as you level this ability up, and you can actually stack this. You can guard one character, the first round. You can ramp up the amount of prot that she takes on, and this makes her very powerful as a guard tank late game. So then we come to another one of her fairly interesting utilities, which is Cauterize. Cauterize can be used in any position, can be used on herself. It is a cure bleed primarily. Because you are cauterizing a wound, essentially, you're also bringing the light up, so it's a torch plus 3. It buffs the target for significant bleed resist, but debuffs the target for -2 speed and plus stress damage received for a couple rounds. So Cauterize, is not one of the most practical abilities. I find that really this is something that I will, for the most part, use in the Cove as a really great utility. The fact that it has that much bleed resist is super nice. It's a little bit punishing to reduce the speed and increase the stress damage taken. But the fact that you can just outright remove a bleed, say you get pinched by a Krabby in the Cove on veteran or champion level, and you've got just a huge bleed DOT on you. To just completely remove that is why Cure is powerful. That is a huge damage prevention. So, you know, definitely something to take in consideration, especially if you're moving into the Cove. So finally, last in her kit is Brand. This is her marking utility. Brand can be used in any rank, and it can target any enemy in position 1, 2, or 3. It is a ranged attack with an accuracy base 95, a minus 60% damage modifier, a minus 6% crit modifier. It bypasses stealth, de-stealths the target, marks the target, debuffs their speed by 1 at level 1 with a 100% base chance, and buffs the torch just a little bit. So Brand was actually nerfed fairly recently, and I think right at the turn of Color of Madness expansion. And I think that for the most part, this nerf was really in the fact that you used to be able to target rank 4 with this, and it used to do more damage. So the nerf is really to make Wrath less overshadowed by this ability. For the most part, people weren't using Wrath very much because you could get away with so much damage and utility by spamming Brand or just constantly marking things. But you know, Marvin really wanted people to appreciate and utilize Wrath more often. So now we have a much healthier relationship between the two.
Press this advantage. Give them no quarter.
So now that we have a detailed look at what each ability does, let's just talk about practical builds and group synergy and that kind of stuff. I mean, in general, this is a class that, because it has guard utility, makes her really valuable, as I said, later game or in any of those certain boss fights where guard is important. There's just not a lot of classes in Darkest Dungeon that come with guard utility. And if you're a veteran of Darkest Dungeon, you find that, you know, it is one of those things that as you get to late game becomes more and more necessary because your characters can just be crit. Now, in general, I think about taking a kit that looks something like this. I think this is a very practical kit that you can use with her, at least until late game or in certain circumstances. I mean, this gives you her melee attack in position 1 or 2, her ranged attack in position 1 through 3, and then you also have your guard and stress buff if you really need it. But then you also have your ability to mark things and really synergize with mark groups. So then again, when it comes to Vengeance, Vengeance is a lot of fun. It is just a cool thing to see. It's a fun thing to see happen. It is kind of an interesting event where, you know, you really see her spread her wings and just blast something with holy energy. The fact that it is so flexible to be able to reach any rank is really cool. It does a lot of damage. It activates her riposte. This is, you know, a lot of output and utility coming out of this one ability. And it's just completely limited by the fact that you have to be low health. So again, it's one of those things where it is not always the easiest thing to take along, but if I'm going into a boss fight or if I'm going to be at the champion level and going up against, you know, difficult high damage groups with frequency, then it is probably worth equipping so that you have a nice counterattack to something that is just hitting you very, very hard. And then finally, you know, the last thing to really take into consideration with this class is just how mark dependent she is. The fact that you have, you know, basically all of her major damage output really being accentuated by hitting a marked target, but also consuming that mark means that you're really forced to think about when to use it, right? Am I going to be attacking something and hoping for that critical hit, that killing blow, or am I taking a risk here and removing the mark with a mediocre hit, and now I've completely slowed the group's damage down because I have to land another mark? So that is kind of the interesting and fun thing about her, is that as long as you have the mark synergy there, you can see her just crush things, but also hit in a very underwhelming way. And there's a gamble in actually taking a swing at something that is marked if you're not going to kill it. Now, in terms of the Seraph's camping utility, her camping, she has 4 unique camping abilities, and these have really seen a lot of changes as of late, and especially with Color of Madness. And they tend to really revolve around really synergizing with other religious characters and not synergizing so much with non-religious characters. And the best example of that right off the bat is Divine Being. Divine Being is a time cost 2, all companions, if religious, minus 20% stress damage for 4 battles, but if not religious, plus 10% stress damage for 4 battles. Now, when it comes to discerning which characters are religious and which are not. It's just important to realize that in the vanilla game, there are basically 3 primary religious characters, and then you've got the added flagellant with the DLC. So you've got the Vestal, the Leper, and the Crusader, which are all religious characters, and then of course the flagellant, which was added with Crimson Court. That's it. Everything other than that is non-religious for the most part. And contrary to popular belief, getting certain quirks like God-fearing does not actually change their religiosity. One thing to note about Divine Being also, though, is that if say half of your group is religious, so you have the Seraph in there, and maybe you've grouped her with the Flag, or you have the Crusader in that group, 2 out of 4 is not too bad. You could actually use herbs and just remove the plus 10% stress damage received debuff if you really want to. So next in her camping kit is Final Verdict. Time cost 3, 1 companion, 20% damage, and 3 speed, but if not religious, suffer 25% hit points and plus 15 stress. So Final Verdict is another one of those camping abilities that she has that has seen a lot of change. It didn't used to be this valuable, and as a time cost 3, I tend to think this is a pretty good camping ability. I mean, 20% damage and 3 speed buff really does a body good, and even if you use this on any non-religious character and they suffer 25% HP and 15 stress, that is not that big a blow. I mean, you get 1 heal in the next combat or 1 stress heal, and you're pretty much good to go. So I would take the risk here. I think a time cost 3 makes this a really reasonable and affordable, decent buff to somebody in the group. So next we have Martyr's Offering. It is a time cost 2, self-only, suffer 33% HP damage, but 1 companion gets 15% HP healed if not religious, 33% HP healed if religious, and it removes their mortality debuffs. This is a pretty interesting ability. The idea here is she is, sort of laying on hand. She is self-sacrificing her own, a third of her HP pool to heal another companion in the group and remove their mortality debuffs. At time cost 2, that is also really affordable. So if she's pretty healthy and you're doing a good job, keeping her survivable and her health pool is nice and high, but somebody else in the group has taken a mortality debuff, they've hit death's door, or they're just low on HP and you really need to get it up, this is definitely a worthwhile ability. So last but not least in her camping kit then is Guardian Angel. This is her Prevent Nighttime Ambush. It is a time cost 4, Prevent Nighttime Ambush, all companions, if religious, 10% prot. So, time cost 4 for Prevent Nighttime Ambush is fairly standard, maybe slightly expensive if it doesn't come with anything else, but the idea that you can give 10% prot to religious companions is a nice add there. So this used to actually be a self-prot buff with Prevent Ambush, and I would use this a lot more often just to kind of aid her survivability and give her that prot before the battle even starts. But it has a little, so it feels to me a little bit less valuable than it used to be. But if you really need that Prevent Nighttime Ambush and you are actually grouped with religious characters, then it is probably a worthy go for. Now, in terms of trinketing the Seraph, there's a lot of flexibility here, and as Marvin said to me, it really depends on how you want to play her. She comes with some interesting trinkets, like the Radiant Sensor, which is a minus 20% stress damage if torch is high, scouting chance if torch is high, reduction of party surprise if torch is high. So she's playing with the torch and light theme there a little bit. She also has the Faithful Pendant, which you get fairly commonly, the 15% virtue chance if torch is high. So there's some of that stuff that is kind of interesting, but not really that practical or that useful. I definitely don't mind scouting chance and party surprise and reduction of stress damage. That is not bad. But it depends on how you want to play her. Marvin suggests that you use something like the Book of Rage if you want to play her more as a Vengeance Seraph, getting her, back down below 33% HP with any frequency and then hitting really, really hard with her laser. You could also pick up what she has, which is called the Torturer's Mask. The Torturer's Mask is great at buffing her stun ability. It ups her stun percent chance at the cost of virtue chance and bleed resist, I believe. So that is kind of nice if you really want to be getting a lot more value out of Visage. But I mean, it really is kind of up to you. I mean, I think you could go with something like Barristan's and, you know, give her just that flat 25% prot at the cost of 20 stress damage. That is a really costly stress damage take. But if you think about throwing that flat 25% prot on her and just making her a stronger tank, remember that intervention also gives her minus 10% stress damage received when guarding at level 1. So, you know, that will help alleviate a little bit of the stress and strengthen the overall efficacy of her guard in general. I sincerely hope you've enjoyed this brief overview of Marvin Seo's Seraph class. As always, I will include the link to download her from Steam in the information below the video, as well as a link to the rest of Marvin Seo's mods. Don't forget that the Seraph also comes with a Town Event mod should you want to play her immediately, her Crimson Court trinkets, and Color of Madness trinkets. Again, if you have any questions about how to play the Seraph, feel free to ask me in the questions below. Thank you guys so much for all the support that you've given me on these overview videos. I really appreciate all the comments, likes, and subs, and all the things that help a wannabe YouTuber like myself. Take care, and we'll see you next time.